Welcome to On the Real Side. I'm Bob Mover, and very happy to have a really great friend of mine for a long time, and a wonderful musician, saxophonist, composer, and teacher, one of the better teachers in the world as well. And I'm doubly delighted because this is Kirk MacDonald, by the way, is the guest, one of our guests today, our other guest. And I say I'm doubly delighted because Kirk has a wonderful daughter named Virginia MacDonald, who is a real virtuoso clarinetist, which is a very great thing on a couple of levels. For one thing, there aren't that many great clarinet players, and it also is, being the father of three daughters, I always like to see women do things of note. Mm-hmm. So I'm not being chauvinistic, I'm being realistic in the sense that there's a lot of women now that are playing. But when we were coming up, myself and Kirk too, to some extent, it wasn't such a prevalent thing for women to especially be horn players. There were some piano players, but it was almost like a strange thing that women, they sing, or that's okay, or, you know, they had a certain place. And so then there started to be some female horn players and, you know, women who made a mark. In fact, we just lost a very wonderful musician who was one of my students, Claire Daly, late baritone player. In the 3 semesters I taught at Berkeley, Claire was one of those people who managed to be in just about every class I taught. And she would come to my gigs, and I'd let her sit in the last set with some of the students, and she had a wonderful spirit, and she could really play. So we're kind of still getting over that. But anyway, we are having Virginia MacDonald with us today. And Virginia, maybe I would start with some things about you. For one thing, she's about to do a record with, well, I will get the name of the leader, but I know that Dick Oates and Joe Magnarelli are both on it. And that's some nice company to be in. You know, that's, and who is the drummer? He's a European.
He's a European. He's Austrian. He's an Austrian drummer. His name is Bernd Reiter. So yeah, he kind of plays in that scene. He was just doing something with Mags, Dick Oates, Gary Simoleon. So they were over in Europe doing, I think, a tribute to Tad Dameron.
Thad Jones. Yeah. Thad Jones.
Oh, yeah. I think I know about that. Yeah, you know, Gary was my very first student in New York.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, he was 18 and I was 22.
Wow.
He lived from Long Island. I was with Chet Baker at the time, and we'd play. I give him his lesson. He was playing alto, didn't play baritone yet. And so, well, that sounds really good. And I know you've been, you know, you sound great. I heard some of you. I actually know you better as in music. I checked you out, and it sounded wonderful. And let's, you know, I mean, I kind of remember, as we were saying a little earlier, you as an infant, and I haven't really seen you since then. You know, and as far as I know, you hadn't started playing yet. I think that was a few weeks later.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, I start them young in this family.
Yeah.
When did you actually start to play?
I started playing clarinet when I think I was probably 6. And so for whatever reason, I think as the story goes, he had a bunch of different instruments laid out for me to kind of check out. And so obviously the saxophone was there. What else? I think we had like a flute.
Alto, a soprano, a flute, a clarinet, tenor.
Yeah. Anyway, so I saw the clarinet and I just went, oh my God, like what is that? I was fascinated by it, and my fingers were too small to cover the tone holes. But for whatever reason, I was so committed to playing that I think I waited another year or so.
Yeah, about a year. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've been playing it since.
And
Yeah.
that's what you wanted. When you saw it for the first time, was it together or in pieces?
I think it was together.
I think so.
I remember, oh, like, man, what are those buttons? I just thought it looked so cool. And I think part of me too, I was like, there's no way I'm doing the same thing as this guy, even at that age.
Right.
I'm going to do something different. And so for whatever reason, I love the way that it looked. And that was kind of it for me. Yeah.
So you heard, of course, you heard jazz all around the house, and you heard, other things that your dad was listening to, classical music and stuff. Did you have some music? I remember my daughter Emily, who's older. She's also in music, singer songwriter, and also sings great as a jazz singer too. But she had her her New Kids on the Block and Michael Jackson, and I heard all that music with her. I figured like if she was going to come over to my music, well, I'll check out what she's into.
Right.
So we did that, and I remember she liked this guy Rick Astley. She really liked him. Never gonna give you up, gonna take you down, whatever it was, and hurt you. But I thought it was wonderful because she said to me, "There's one song I really like the most on this record." I said, "What is it?" And she played it, and it was "When I Fall in Love."
Oh wow! Okay.
She loved standards, so it was like I kind of, that's kind of the music of my heart. And she, quite on her own, I didn't say, "Hey, he does this one, listen to that." She kind of found it on her own, and I said, "Okay, well, that's good to know." We shared, So you, but on your own, do you remember what's the first music you kind of remember liking that wasn't something that your dad played for you? Was there none?
Oh man, well, it's hard to say because it was just there forever. Like I don't remember a time when music wasn't just a constant in my life, especially this music. And I think I started playing so young, and I heard everything at such a young age that it's hard to say what was your influence and what I actually wanted to listen to. It's so seeped together. And I think, yeah, and I think it wasn't until I was older, a teenager, where, of course, you kind of have your own things that you're into as a kid, and listening to pop music and rock music. And my mom, Lucy, is such a big Beatles fan, and that was kind of her era and the music of the 60s and 70s. And so I think she kind of got me started into that world as well, which is good. It's good to have a balance. But I think, like as a kid too, it's hard. And I don't know if you ever experienced this with Emily, but, being told to listen to certain things or check out certain things. And I would kind of go like, yeah, okay, all right, Dad. And then go and do something else just to be a little bit of a contrarian. Like I think I was maybe a little bit of a brat that way. So I feel like there's a lot of things that you told me to listen to, and I would kind of go like, okay. And then, I was older, and then finally I would go like, oh, wow, this is actually killing. Like, this is amazing. Why didn't I listen to him earlier?
And it happens.
Yeah.
We have, my Emily did a record, a tribute to Peggy Lee.
Oh, nice.
And we had Bob Cranshaw and Jimmy Wormworth, a great drummer, and Ehud Asheri, very good pianist in New York. Joe Cohn played on some of it.
Nice.
And, she got fascinated with Peggy Lee. And the one thing I can claim is that when we were taking a trip, we drove from, New York. I picked her up in Toronto, and my friend Sam Kulak was driving, and we drove to California because I had some gigs with Joe DiOrio, the guitar player out in California. And so we stopped along the way in different cities, and we had a van. So we all slept in the van. It was Emily and a girlfriend of hers, and Sam and I. And we were in Sacramento, California, and Sam was tired, and he had to get some sleep, before we hit San Francisco, I think was the first place. And so while he's sleeping, we said, hey, let's take a little walk to downtown Sacramento. And then we found a CD there of Peggy Lee, and I said, are you hip to Peggy Lee? And she said, well, she liked Billie Holiday, You know, she'd gotten into that. I said, well, maybe you'll like this. So we got this CD, and she never looked back. You know, Peggy became her inspiration. You know, and that was she does remember that was my idea that she should listen to that. You know, other things though, you know, she's become like a thesaurus of pop music. Like she knows all the things that Ruth Brown did. I mean, like rhythm and blues and you know stuff that I don't know anything about. She's kind of got a lot more. So, who was the first jazz clarinetist that you? I know your dad is probably you play a little bit of clarinet, but I never heard you do anything but play saxophone.
Yeah, well, I mean, she obviously has the clarinet genes in this family. No doubt. I would say I'm probably the world's second worst clarinet player. Just, you know, there's got to be somebody out there that doesn't play it as badly as I do.
I am the worst clarinetist. When I used to practice my clarinet, Ira Sullivan would come over to our house to practice. Sometimes he'd just hang out. He'd just show up. And sometimes Ira would show up and I'd be practicing my clarinet. And Ira would go, behold, the snake charmer. Somehow I just didn't have, you know, also my dad was a big Benny Goodman guy. And I really, I appreciated Benny, but I didn't love him, you know, I mean, it was a certain thing. Years later, I heard Artie Shaw. I said, oh, if I'd have heard Artie Shaw, I might have had an idea of what the sound should be. I didn't really have a clarinet sound in my head.
Yeah.
You know,
I was similar. I could, you know, I mean, I knew the fingerings, but I could never really get the sound thing together, you know, and so at a certain point, I just thought it's not for me, you know, and so even for, you know, just making myself available for certain types of work, I just said, no, that's it, you know, saxophone composition, you know, it's just, it's not.
Yeah, well, I know what you mean. I used to tell people, you know, nobody says to Heifetz, hey, Yasha, when you come to work, would you bring your viola? You know, you know, and I just felt if you played one instrument, you had a chance of finding your own self on it. You know, I think that was a thing. That, you know, even for a while, it took me a long time to go from alto to soprano. And then 30 years into playing, I said, now I'm ready to play tenor too.
Right.
I had you know, but it, you know, so I think you're really just playing the clarinet. Of course, I got to mention Eddie Daniels. He was, when I heard Eddie, I said, you know, that would be a way I might want to play clarinet too.
Definitely. Yeah. And I mean, he's a great saxophone player too. He's incredible. This stuff with Freddie, you know, where he's playing tenor, he sounds great.
I used to hear him live at the Vanguard.
Yeah.
That and Mel. And I remember one night it was Eddie and Joe Henderson.
Oh wow.
And they were the two tenors, and it was quite something, you know. But yeah, I mean Eddie, I know he's a great flute player too. There's a record with Bucky Pizzarelli where he plays a lot of duo and plays some flute on that. I mean, I've heard him in other occasions, but you know, he's probably the world's champion practicer.
Oh,
so Eddie,
yeah.
I think he puts in more time on the actual practicing the instruments than anybody I've ever heard. And I practice a lot, and I know you did, Kirk. You know, we all worked hard at that. So yeah, so you but what, you know, who did you, when you started to play the clarinet, did you have any models that you followed or just you?
Yeah, I mean, it was weird. I guess my path was a little bit different. I mean, I didn't really have any classical background just because of the world that we grew up in, or that I grew up in, and you know where we're coming from. So I mostly studied clarinet with saxophone players who doubled on clarinet. And so I think as a result, I kind of picked up some weird technical things that still exist to this day. But you know, you start playing so young that you're not really thinking at that point about how to cultivate, an artistic voice or what you're trying to do on a larger scale. And then, when I started taking music a little bit more seriously and getting a little bit deeper into it, of course, I was exposed to people just like you said, Benny Goodman, Artie Shaw, Buddy DeFranco, of course. And so it's difficult. I always have a hard time saying this in a way that doesn't feel disrespectful. I absolutely love all of their music, and I love their playing. I think they were absolute masters at what they did. But it would kind of be akin to if, the lineage of saxophone ended with Coleman Hawkins or Lester Young. There was no Bird after, there was no Train, there was no Michael Brecker, there was no so on and so on. And so it felt kind of strange that most of the clarinet players that I could seek out were kind of more from a period that was earlier on than maybe some of the other music that I was drawn to. So I felt myself being drawn more to, Blue Note albums, bebop, music more modern. And I realized, okay, wow, there's not a lot of people that I feel like I can listen to on this instrument that kind of went in that, direction in the tradition. So I felt at the time that, okay, I probably am going to have to spend a lot of time listening to other instrumentalists on different instruments doing their thing, and seeing how I can bring some of that to the clarinet, because I was really focused. And I think a big part of that is just, hearing you growing up and, hearing the saxophone as such a dominant voice. So I was really interested in how can I kind of bring some of that vocabulary and maybe some of more of a modern language and approach onto this instrument, where it seemed like there is a really strong history and lineage, but then it kind of ended at a certain point, and then it became like really far and few in between. The one person who I heard, I think I was in high school, and I just it blew me away, was Jimmy Giuffre. And when I heard him play clarinet for the first time, I was just like totally in shock, because I hadn't heard anyone up until that point kind of utilize the lower register of the instrument. He had a type of flexibility in that range that I felt kind of mirrored what I wanted to hear and what I was hearing saxophone players do and what I was hearing trumpet players do. And I felt like I wasn't necessarily hearing a lot of other clarinet players do in the way that I wanted to. And so I really got into his music and his playing. And, I studied with Pat LaBarbera when I went to school, and he kind of hit me to this great solo that was on a Shorty Rogers album, I think from 1955. And so Jimmy Giuffre's playing clarinet. It's just like a F blues, and the entire solo is in the lower register of the clarinet, which up until that point I had never heard anything like that.
I think Tony Scott played down there.
Yeah, absolutely. Tony Scott, he had a really, really great sound too in the lower register. But that to me was just kind of an eye-opening moment. And, Pat mentioned that it was actually the first solo that Michael Brecker ever learned to play, which I thought was really, really interesting. So
Clarinet solo, Jimmy's clarinet solo.
Yeah. It's on a track. It's called Martians Go Home. It's like this obscure kind of Shorty Rogers album from, I think, 1955. But I heard that, and I just remember thinking, okay, so it's possible to kind of get that same warmth and flexibility that I was hearing. And then, of course, I was exposed to people like Anat Cohen, Eddie Daniels, like you mentioned. And then that was kind of like, okay, so there is room and there is a voice for more modern clarinet. There's just not that many people who are doing it.
That's interesting. Jimmy Giuffre being a jumping off point.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Yeah, that's, I can see where Giuffre, I had one lesson with him.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm.
Which didn't go well.
Oh.
Yeah. I didn't, see, I don't play clarinet, and I kind of liked his tenor playing, but
right.
Ricky Kamuka was helping me with the tenor, with saxophone. I was in New York, I was living in New York, and I was 16, and I wanted to study arranging with Jimmy. That was what I really was interested in doing.
Yeah. Mhm.
And he spent the whole lesson trying to tell me to use a double lip embouchure.
Yeah.
And I have very sharp front teeth anyway. Archie Pincus used to call me the beaver. When I had to try mouthpieces, he put it on patches so I wouldn't fight his mouthpieces. And it hurts. The double lip is not for me. I had a hard time with it. And plus, it was really funny because, in all honesty, we both played, and my sound was bigger than his on the saxophone. And, and I figured, well, for clarinet, that's probably very useful. But he didn't really tell me anything. The thing I would ask him about was like arranging, like, can you show me about how you voice horns and, these kind of things. And, I'd like to do that. And he said, I'm the teacher. I'll tell you what you want to learn.
Wow.
And I said, oh, okay. And then I left my sunglasses. I was so nervous to get out of there. I just wanted to leave. So I left my sunglasses there. A couple of weeks later, he was playing at the half note. And I went out to hear him at the half note. And I said, oh, by the way, I left my sunglasses at your place. Do you think maybe you could bring them by, and I mean, I'll come in tomorrow or later in the week. Because I was hanging out at the half note. I knew the Canarino family and everything.
Right.
He said, no.
Oh, no.
He said, you leave them, you lose them.
God.
So I still listen to him sometimes.
Right.
I mean,
No.
I mean, his clarinet didn't tell me that.
Right. Oh man, that's too funny.
So,
I'm sorry to hear that.
I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but I mean,
Oh, that's funny.
But, I mean, maybe I was an obnoxious little kid. I don't know. Like, he might have had his reasons. People sometimes you don't see yourself the way
Right.
you do sometimes. Like I thought Mingus gave me a hard time, and then when I saw Mingus years later, he said, "Yeah, I hear good things about you. I hear you don't got so much to prove no more."
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
I thought he was the bad guy, and then I looked at myself in retrospect, 7 or 8 years after we had. What? He might have had a point with that,
Right. Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, clarinet players tend to have pretty weird temperaments in my experience.
I don't know. I think all musicians have curious temperaments. Sometimes it conforms to an instrument,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
sometimes, like bass players, we won't even get into that. I mean, I could spend all day on quirky bass players that I've known, but we'll have to do that. So you never, just as far as your education, Virginia, I'm going to get to you, Kirk, in a minute.
Man, don't worry. I'm enjoying this.
But I was thinking, so you went to high school.
Yes.
And did you go to that arts high school in Toronto? What is it called? I think my daughter went there for a little while. Claude Watson? No, that's.
It was one of the. I went to a Etobicoke School of the Arts. I was there, in theory.
Yeah,
Show up.
high school.
I would grace the building with my presence every.
I understand that. Yeah, I barely. Physically, I was technically there.
Right.
So, but were you practicing? Is that you pretty much knew? I mean, did you ever entertain the idea of being something other than a musician?
No, not really. No, I don't think so. There just wasn't anything else. It felt so natural. It was like drinking water, it's just like it was never even really a thought in my mind that I would do.
That's what Emily said too. She used to go to the Pilot and
Yeah.
play around. And, you probably did the same thing, like being a little girl. You were like 7, 8 years old.
Yeah.
Did your dad take you those Sunday afternoons sometimes,
I loved it. Yeah, I loved it when I was a kid. Like I loved being in those places and the energy and the people and I
yeah,
just I found that so appealing when I was young. I mean, I still do, obviously. But
yeah,
yeah.
that's true. I know Emily found that way too. And, I wasn't sure, you don't know if they're even listening because she's running around and she's sitting with
Yeah.
different people. And, you got the freedom. It's an open space, the pilot. And one
Right.
day I realized she really does listen to this music because she
Mm,
said to me, Daddy, that song that you sang,
mm,
A Cottage for Sale,
mm.
very sad song.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
And I realized she was listening to everything. She was catching all of it. And
Mm.
and she says, "What else could I have been?" She said, "I remember being 4 years old and falling asleep in this Paris club, and I was sleeping on a little banquette in the corner, right off of the bandstand, and you were playing with Art Farmer. What else would I want to do?"
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's been life always for me. So, yeah, that was kind of it. I mean, I finished high school. I made it through.
I
And then,
didn't. So good for you.
yeah. Thank you. Um, and then I went to school and yeah,
What school did you?
I
Did
went to Humber. I went to Humber College. Yeah.
Humber?
And I studied with Pat LaBarbera the 4 or so years that I was there. So that was great. I mean, that was an education in and of itself. And I kind of just continued. I took some more classically based lessons when I was in high school, and that didn't really last a very long time either. I remember everything was wrong. My embouchure was wrong, my hand position, my gear, my technique, my sound, everything was not right.
Well, then
Um,
you're doing something right. If you're doing all those things wrong and it sounds good,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Then it must not be wrong. I mean, that's how you
Yeah.
Mhm.
think about it.
Yeah, I
You know,
think one of the things that a lot of people really gravitate to Virginia's playing is her sound, and it's a very unique sound for clarinet. Like, it's not your traditional classical sound. There's a different kind of color to it, and I think part of that is having developed her own concept of sound. I think a lot of the models were saxophone players as
Mhm.
well, and trumpet players,
Mhm.
and just over time, just cultivating her own concept of what the instrument sounds like. And I mean, I hear her sound and I go like, wow, that's, a lot of people go, if the clarinet sounded like that, I'd be into it a lot more.
yeah, I felt that when I heard you too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I said, yeah, if somebody had played like that when I was a kid, it
So
might have interested me in doubling a little bit. And I mean, just for the sake of playing it, I mean, which is how I felt when I heard Artie Shaw. Just in a
Mhm.
similar way, I said, I like the way he played ballads and
Yeah.
the fluidity with which he played.
Yeah.
The thing is also, isn't it interesting about sound? I think a lot about sound. And
Mm.
one thing I find that's interesting is the sound and the ideas should run together.
hmm
Mm.
Like there was a saxophone player who I won't name, but I always felt there was something off about his playing, as well as the cat played. He was good. And
Mm.
then I realized he was playing Coltrane-ish ideas with a Stan Getz kind of tone.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
somehow the juxtaposition of the two, though it made him kind of unique, because I didn't know anybody else that really played
hmm
like that,
Mhm.
so I guess that's good.
Mhm.
But it didn't get me because the tone, like I can't imagine Joe Henderson's ideas going with anybody else's tone, or with a number of people.
Right.
I
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
imagine, your father's ideas going with somebody else's sound. It's
Yeah. You got
Yeah.
you got to sell the concept, really. I mean, they do have to go together. Yeah.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
the other thing that was said about sound to me, which was really interesting, is I was listening to records with Stan Getz one day, and I played him. We were listening to a tenor player named Nicky Hill on an Ira Sullivan
Right,
record.
okay. Yeah, yeah.
Really good tenor player on this record, Bird Lives. You should hear him. Kind of unique. Sounds a little like the John Gilmore kind of Chicago style sound. His own version of it. But I said to Stan, I said, well, what do you think of that kind of saxophone playing? He said, oh, it's very nice. He said, it's really good. And I was surprised because it's so different than his playing. Right. But he says, you see, he has a beautiful sound. He has an concept, but it's very good I said, what do you mean? He said, well, there are some people that hear this horn as being and other people hear ooh. I said, oh, he says, Lester Young has the quintessential ooh. And I myself aim for that kind of purity of the ooh.
Yeah, yeah.
He says, Coltrane is the real definition of a beautiful and. And he said, for instance, Don Byas had a little and. Sonny Rollins is in between ooh and and. He does this. So Stan gave me this whole thing like this. I told Lee Konitz about that, and Lee gave me this reflective look and grabs his chin and goes, what about ah?
Wow.
Too much.
That's great.
So, your parents, I got to tell you something about your parents. The original I Love Lucy, when I think of I Love Lucy, I don't think of Lucy and Desi.
Yeah.
Kirk and Lucy. Because when I met them, your dad was in the RCMP.
Right.
Weird enough, because he was the first Mountie I ever met. So I only knew Sergeant Preston of the Yukon. And your father was a very interesting kind of soldier. And had, different proclivities than a lot of soldiers. But what I liked about it was when I went to Ottawa, I think you got me a gig in Ottawa. We had met in Vancouver.
Right.
And we just hung out every day and became like instant brothers. We went to sessions at night. We were both there for about a week, right?
Yeah, and way back, 85, 86.
85, 86. And
40 years almost, yeah.
Yeah, and you were there, I guess, with an RCMP jazz group or something.
Yeah, we were out there a bunch of times. It was Expo 86. So, we were there. We spent a lot of time there that summer. And one of the trips coincided with the Jazz Festival. And I think you were probably out doing something for the festival. Yeah,
I was playing with different, with Kenny Wheeler, and I did a couple concerts together.
Yeah, okay.
And one was we did one of like totally free jazz.
Okay.
And we did one with a bebop kind of rhythm section. So we had those kind of things. And then I played with Peter Leach.
Peter, I remember hearing you with Peter, actually. Yeah.
Right. And the pianist was a very young Rene Rosnes.
Oh, was Rini? Okay. Yeah.
He was on piano on that. And I recall her as being very shy or very quiet, so I didn't really get to know her. We played, we had a good time, but that was about it. Yeah, so I was out in Vancouver, and Steve Lacy's band was out there too. And so I spent time hanging with those madmen. And I loved them all. But and then you showed up, and I guess you knew me from somewhere.
I think we met before that, maybe in Toronto. I think we met in Toronto. And I'm trying to think. And then I used to see, you were living in Montreal at the time?
Yeah, I was just about to move to Toronto.
Yeah.
So I was
I think we met maybe, I think the first time I met you was PJ Perry was playing at East 85th. You were in town, you sat in, and I think that's where I met you. It was Jerry Fuller.
And Neil and Bernie, I think.
Maybe Bernie or Gary Williamson. I don't quite recall who it was, but that might have been the first time we met. That would have been a bit before Vancouver, I believe.
And then you and I ended up at the place called the Classical Joint.
Yeah, we hung out there, and there was another after hours. That's right. Yeah,
Burleson,
yeah,
tenor player who was how do you say, handicapped?
yeah.
Wheelchair. He
Played in the wheelchair. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Yeah, but he played incredible.
Great player. Yeah,
Yeah, a lot of technically, he's another one that was like just he was a saxophone. I mean, he could play stuff with harmonics and overtones and double stops
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
stuff like that. That you and I would just sit there. How do you do that? It was like a magic act.
Yeah, yeah. It was
And
something.
then you introduced me to Phil Dwyer. We went to another
Oh.
after hours club,
That's right.
and
Yeah, good times for sure.
yeah.
Well,
And
when I first met you, it's like every time I would see you, it would always be in a different city. It was Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto, New York, like always around the music. I remember running into you at Bradley's. I remember running, Montreal. When I was living in Ottawa, for a year, I would commute back and forth, and I taught at McGill. And so what I would do is spread my teaching over 2 days, Friday, Saturday, so I could hang in town. I could take more gigs in Montreal. But you seem to be pretty busy. I used to hear you a lot in Montreal. At
yeah,
upstairs, like the original upstairs.
yeah. Well, I took 2 years, and Paul Blais said this was professional suicide. But anyway, I decided I didn't want to go on the road until Emily was old enough to know why I went. Because I thought like a 1-year-old, 2-year-old is going to go, who is this guy? He's here, he's gone, he's back again. So I wanted her to feel, even though I didn't live with her mother, I moved down the street because I'm one of those people. I just saw an interview with Al Pacino, and he has children too. And he's always had girlfriends, but he just never really liked domestic life. So I'm strange that way. But I'm very close to my kids and to several women, in my life, but that's not really what I want to talk about. But, I didn't want to go on the road. That was the thing. And I think that when my daughter turned about 2.5, almost 3, I got a chance to go to Europe more often. And I realized that I didn't want to just stay and teach in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I formed a partnership with Walter Davis Jr. and started to travel more to Europe, and that turned into 70-something trips in 15 years. And
Wow.
but I think you, Kirk, you basically, stayed around, and I think that was probably very good for your family life. I think,
Yeah,
that
absolutely. Yeah, for sure, for sure. There were I was in Ottawa until 91, and then I moved back to Toronto. And I used to see you around town quite a bit, but that was a busy time. There was a lot going on. There were a lot of clubs.
well, you brought me down to Ottawa. I remember that.
Oh yeah. We did a few things in Ottawa. We
You
played
brought me
the
there.
Ottawa Festival with Walter Bishop and Biddles and Norman, Marshall Villeneuve.
That's right. And that's
But
where
we
we
also
met. Go ahead.
did a duo. We did 3 nights duo, you and I, in a small club, which was fun.
I remember that. Do you have tapes of that?
There's somewhere I do. Yeah, I've never converted them. We did do a recording for CBC, which I heard, which I thought sounded wonderful, actually. And the club thing was fun. It's.
I remember the duos were really fun. I really had a good time with those duos. And then that's when I really got to meet Lucy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we
I always
yeah.
hung out, and Paige Pugh was hanging around too.
Right. Yeah.
But Lucy and you, I knew right away that you two were mated for life. It was one of the few times I had that experience. I saw a couple, And I said, you know what? I'd make book on this one.
Yeah. Well, we've had many years together. It's been great. Absolutely. And
Yeah,
and we produced this young lady, you know.
you did. And your level of understanding of each other, even at that time, I said, it's interesting because neither of you are very simple people. You're both kind of
No, that's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
individuals, And I said, I don't know if either one of these people would be for everybody, but they are for each other.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And then that's a compliment too, that you're not for everybody. You know what I mean? That I meant it
Yeah, yeah.
in the best possible sense. And so I always knew that your daughter was going to be something special. So I always had that feeling
Right.
because she was growing up with such a hip and understanding environment. If I had to choose in between lives, like let me see, who do I want to go to there?
Right. Yeah, yeah.
Your spirit, if that kind of thing existed, I have a feeling that you said, those people, give me them.
Right. Well, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's true. I mean, it was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun as a kid, I feel like I got to experience a lot of cool things. And probably it's the same with your kids, just growing up in a family
Yeah.
with two artists.
Yeah, creative people. Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
creative mindset, and
Yeah,
Yeah.
it helps. And I mean, I think that the sincerity, because when you have people that sincerely love something, well, like your parents sincerely love each other.
Yeah.
But besides that, your dad's love for the music and your mother's love for whatever he's involved in. I mean, not in a passive sense, because she has a sort of, like I said, she's got an active personality herself. So she
Yeah.
wasn't somebody that just sat there and let him do things. She's quite the opposite of that.
yeah, yeah.
But that you had that kind of thing. Like I was very honored when we did the Peggy Lee record with Emily. Emily went to pay. She produced it. I kind of co-produced it in getting the studio, and the Saul Rubin, by the way, was on the record too.
Oh,
And
nice.
Saul produced it. Saul studio. We did it at I always call it Zanzibar. It's not Zanzibar. His name Zebulon.
Okay.
Zebulon. We call it Zebulon Studios. But anyway, she went to pay Bob Cranshaw, and Bob handed her money back and said, he said, "Your family. I can't take money from family."
Wow. Yeah, yeah.
And he had enjoyed the date too. I could tell that and we sure enjoyed having him on it.
Of course. Yeah.
Worked with Peggy, and he wrote parts of the arrangements. He knew how to navigate them and get through them, and so. But now, Kirk, let me get a little more toward. Well, let me just talk about Virginia's current projects now. And one other thing I was thinking was that, in a way, and it's not your fault, Virginia, but Kirk really didn't have the international career that he might have had, in my opinion, had he chosen to get on the road and pursue the profession of music. I have this theory too about things that for some of us it's a career, and for others it's a vocation. And the vocation of music has always been paramount, I think, in Kirk's mind. Like rather than thinking of there are people, especially living in New York, you will have the feeling, as you hear more and more, there are young musicians who really think about career first.
Yeah,
Well,
definitely.
do this, I should play with so and so. That will advance my career. That will do this and that. I never thought about that stuff. I kick myself now sometimes that I didn't.
Right.
There's a middle ground. I almost felt embarrassed if I was thinking about career.
Right.
Then I'd say, no, you should be thinking about getting the music better, and then that stuff will happen.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I almost went the other direction, steering away from thinking about career.
Yeah.
Where, some friends of mine were not like that and did did better economically and probably worked more. Definitely earned more money. So, you know, I think that it's good that, you know, I see you getting out on the scene and playing with like prominent people in New York, not just, I mean, Canadian musicians are wonderful, and there's probably as many great Canadian musicians proportionately as there might be here. But I remember when the first rhythm section I got when I went to East 85th Street and I was playing in Toronto, I had Bernie Sinensky, Neil, Kieran Overs, and Jerry Fuller. And I was thinking, gee, I don't miss New York at all.
Right.
And, you know, it sounded wonderful. So there was that feeling, and there was always great players there. So, but as far as international recognition is concerned, like Paul Blais said, if you move to Canada, you might as well move to Australia.
Right. Yeah, it's been a bit under the radar here. That way, I mean, we've had great players who aren't really as well known as they should be. I mean, that period, there was a lot going on here, and I mean, in my case, you know, I mean, it would have been nice to do a little bit more traveling, but I mean, I was happy to be in town when Virginia was growing up, number one, particularly the first 5 or so years, 6, 7 years. And so we managed to do that. But there was a lot going on, you know, that you could still do 5-night gigs. You know, I'm trying to think of the clubs that were had. George's was still happening, the Montreal Bistro, East 85th. And then there were other places, you know, where you could book a weekend. So, I mean, you could stay pretty busy in town working with great players. You know, you could
the Rex, which I helped
do the Rex. Yeah, exactly. You know, do a couple of nights there. There was one point where the pilot was booking 4 or 5 days a week. You know, you get a little run there, and then you do, you know, the Rex, and you know, so.
Yeah, well, I know what you mean, because through those years, I hardly have ever played in New York for about 10, 12 years.
Yeah.
I would be in Europe. I'd do my European tour.
Yeah.
And then I'd come back to Toronto, and I wouldn't have to leave my daughter. She was there in Toronto.
Yeah,
I could
exactly.
spend all that time with her. Plus, I could work consistently.
Yeah.
3, 4 gigs a week at least, you know, and with very, very fine musicians. And so I didn't really miss New York that way.
Yeah.
But career-wise, you know, it was certainly, I didn't make any downbeat polls. I didn't, you know, that whole thing, as far as I was concerned, you know, you were like, when I came back to New York in 1998, it was like another planet. Nobody remembered me.
Right, of course. Yeah, yeah.
I had left at the height of my popularity, whatever there was of that, when I was packing clubs, as you know, with my band. And all of a sudden, oh yeah, I've heard your name. You know.
Yeah, I hear you.
You know, you have that. So, you know, the fact that you, I mean, kind of passed that up in that way, and that Lucy is now Lucy. I'm sorry, that Virginia is pursuing that. So, have you thought about that a little bit? Like just the idea that like making a career, and you know, it's not a dirty thing. You know?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think it's interesting because it just goes back to the way I was as a child, and you know, it's nice in a sense that music still has that organic feeling to it for me in a lot of ways. I don't think that will ever go away, in the sense that it was just there as it was when I was a child. And I think one of my favorite things that you kind of instilled in me at a young age is that I wasn't owed anything by anyone. And I think that still really sticks with me today. I've never felt entitled to anything or any opportunity, any chance to play with someone I admire or respect. And so when those things happen, I'm so overjoyed and I feel absolutely grateful and blessed. And when they don't happen, I think I'm able to kind of let it roll off a lot easier. And so I feel like for whatever reason, I've been very lucky. And I feel like music was always so important to me. It still is. It's everything to me in a lot of ways, because it's so intertwined with life. So I think maybe in the same sense that you were able to find work, which can be hard doing what we do, I've always felt that there will be something or a way for me. So it's strange because we live in different times too. And that's something that I'm very aware of. Like, you know, spending time in one city, there's less places to play. So I feel like naturally you end up kind of spending more time on the road, which is what I've been doing. And I feel really happy to be doing that. I'm young. I love traveling. I love going to new places. I love playing with different musicians. But I think for me, it's always been about the music still. I guess I'm aware and I'm cognizant that these are great opportunities, but I've never really viewed it as a way to further my career or get more recognition. And I always kind of figured, well, the people who I looked up to and look up to still didn't really think about it that way. And they ended up doing fine for themselves. So I feel like it's a mixture of, being prepared, I guess, and working towards something my whole life thus far. But I don't know that I've actively really sought out too many things with the idea of I need this to further my career or gain some kind of clout.
I think serendipity generally has a lot to do with most of our lives.
Yeah.
The way I met my mentors, the way I ran into things like that's what I mean. I never really actively sought things either.
Yeah.
But they seemed to come to me by just somehow I would be in a certain place at a certain time and a certain thing would happen.
Yeah.
Well, being around the music and pursuing the music, I think, is probably opened a lot of doors for all of us. I know in your case, being in New York, I suppose would have an advantage at a certain point. But just pursuing the music is like if you put something good out there, it will come back your way. So opportunities do come my way. They certainly come Virginia's way. I know they've come your way, and just being in there, being game to continue to grow musically, I think is that's kind of the payoff. Is you're ready to get out and play, and when opportunities come up, you're able to embrace those and prosper. It's.
I just think, in retrospect, though, sometimes when you've got a good thing, I think some of the younger guys have the right idea in the sense of being professionally oriented.
Mm-hmm.
You got a good band, get a good agent.
Yeah, hard to do.
Right.
Do that, and you didn't do that. I didn't do that.
No.
Because there was a certain way of, for whatever reasons, the cats that did it one thing was they have a good record company.
Yeah.
So,
but that's all changed. That's all changed.
Right,
I
that
think
doesn't happen now.
I think it's generational too, Bob. It's like when I was coming up, it was like, okay, check out, the more experienced players on the scene. Like for me, it was guys like Bernie, Sinensky, Jerry Fuller, Terry Clark, Don Thompson, Gary Williamson, Pat LaBarbera, Sam Noto, Ed Bickard, what are they doing musically? How do I prepare myself for that? And so there was a concept of earning your way onto bandstand. So people were thinking about becoming part of an established community. I mean, you still had your peers that you would play with and things like that. But in terms of development, it was like, you know, trying to deal with raising your level to what was happening out there. You know,
you did have a hip community of elders in Toronto. I mean,
yeah, oh yeah, very much so. You know,
no dearth of wisdom. But the thing was, that's what's funny, and I think what might have happened to Canadians, as opposed to just, I'm talking from a professional, not really a musical point of view.
Yeah.
But, you know, the thing is, and I did the same thing. Like, I mean, when I had this band in my early 20s, I was like leading a group. When I was 24, I left Chet Baker and I started to have regular gigs at Sweet Basil for about 2.5 years. I had either every Sunday and Monday or 1 week a month.
Mm-hmm.
And I had, you know, various rhythm sections, either Kenny Barron or Albert Daly on piano, and, you know, Ron McClure or Buster Williams or George Mraz on bass, and Ben Riley, and all kinds of things. I mean, the immediate Tom Harrell or Claudio Roditi on trumpet.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, I had Tom Harrell before anybody. He left Horace, and he really was playing with me, and with Arnie Lawrence had a little group that he played with too.
Yeah, and he sounded great in those days, man. I mean, he still does, you know, but
that was the thing. Now, of course, Phil Woods got him from me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he didn't get him from me, but right after that, and Phil had the agent, Abby Hoffer, at the time, who we later came to hate. But nevertheless, there were bookings. There were tours. Now, you know, as my father told me, and of course, sometimes we don't listen to our parents when we should. He said, you got to get a good agent, and the agent will get you on the road with the band. For instance, when you had that band with Sam Noto, that band, Sam Noto, Mark Eisenman, Steve Wallace, John Sumner, or Bob McLaren.
Yeah.
I would sit in with you guys, and that was as good a band as I just about had heard anywhere in those days. And that record you did.
We had some great times with that band. And I mean, and that lasted for a while. I mean, I was always thinking it would be so nice to get out with that band, you know, because, you know, Sam was well known, but it never happened, you know. But the music continued to grow over a long period of time. I mean, you know, I spent probably at least 15 years working with Sam. You know,
well, I remember
going back to the mid 80s, you know, until he started playing less, probably around 2000, shortly after you left town, you know, and I mean, at that point he was sounding great, you know, into his late 60s, early 70s. He's still, you know, everything.
Oh, yeah, you both were. I mean, I thought it was.
Yeah.
And see, you've been in New York. This is what I'm just thinking. The New York mentality forces you to work.
Yeah.
It kind of puts you in the position where you're going to work, or you're going to take a full-time teaching gig, or you're going to be selling shoes.
Yeah.
So there was, you know, Canada, the life was actually a little easier to navigate. There wasn't the threat of starvation and the hawk on every corner. So, you know what I mean? If you don't do this, the make it or break it thing wasn't really, you could still live. All you guys lived comfortably and did okay. So why go on the road and risk my life for this? And in a way, I understand that. And in a way, it's a pity, because you would have gotten known. It was a band that deserved to be known internationally.
Yeah, I think so. Sure.
You know, and I also didn't have the business acumen to really push.
Yeah.
And you know, you look back at your life, especially when you get to our age, and I always tell people I hate the song My Way, because I hate it for a number of reasons, and I guess Sinatra hated it too, but so I'm told. But the thing I really hate about it is one lyric: regret. I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention. The end is near, and he only has two. His regrets are too few to mention. What is he, 7 years old? I mean, well, come on, man. You know, I mean, I don't consider my life a total failure, but regrets, I've got more than a few.
Yeah.
So
A half a dozen or so, yeah.
at least, you know, on a good day, you know, and so, but that's what I think that like Lornlovsky,
Yeah.
another example of a world-class player. I mean, Pat LaBarbera moved there when he was already working steadily with Elvin Jones.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that came up, you know, and then he decided to concentrate more on teaching and get off the road because, you know, he'd done it and
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
enough of it. But you know, that's one thing that I always felt that that the world should have known you're playing better.
Right.
And you know, and I think part of
Still,
that is
still time. I'm not done yet, you know. But
yeah. Well, no,
I
I
mean,
don't.
we've actually been doing some traveling, like with Lorne. You know, there's a group called the Canadian Jazz Collective. We've done a couple of European tours. We've done 2 CDs. Virginia plays in the group. Lorne, Neil, Swainson, Brian Dickinson, Derek Gardner, great trumpet player out of Chicago now, and Bernd Ryder is the drummer from Europe. So we've had some good fun with that, you know, and so you know, there's a little bit of traveling going on,
So what's it called again? So people hear it. It's the Canadian
the Canadian Jazz Collective.
Collective.
And I mean, essentially, it's 3 co-leaders. It's Derek Gardner, Lorne Lofsky, and myself co-lead the band. So we bring in the compositions and.
Is there a label, a record label?
The first.
It was MPS.
Oh yeah, MPS. The first record we recorded at the MPS studios in Villingen, Germany, and we did. It was like a real throwback. We recorded acoustically in the studio, live to tape, no headphones, just set up in the room. So back in the prehistoric days, you know. So we did that, and then we did a second live recording in Brest, France.
This last year.
That was last year.
Yeah.
So that's on Fresh Sound.
Yeah, sure.
Live at La Vauban. And so it was the last date of a tour we did. We did 16 or 18 days. And so it was the last concert we did. So there are 2 recordings out with that group. Which is nice, you know. And so, you know, Lauren's getting out doing some things. You know, Virginia and I have also toured a little bit with my Generations Quartet. We've done some things here.
Went to India.
We did a tour of India together just before the pandemic. 2 weeks with that. That was fun. And so, you know, I've been inactive lately. I've been dealing with some health issues, but you know, I'm planning on trying to get out and do, you know, more things myself. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been dealing with my health issues too.
Yeah.
And you know, it's funny, it's ironic too. You got to have some humor. Since I've been informed that I can't travel because of my lung condition, I can't fly, I can't be in any altitude. I can't go to Colorado, for example, even.
Right. Yeah.
I also am like the boy in the bubble. I can't be exposed to germs and this and that. And, you know, and most of the time my lungs work, but I might have a day where I'm not breathing too well. So if I was on tour and had $1,000 gig that night and couldn't play, it's just something. So I play a lot, and I play in my living room, and I have students that come over and musicians that come over. I've got a nice Kawai upright piano, and I got a set of drums here, and I'm blowing, I'm playing, and we're recording a lot. But I, you know, I got offers to, oh man, with Japan, and for all these students of mine who would go to Grant Stewart has a school, the Decca Jazz Institute, and these guys are like, oh man, we'd love to bring you to our countries, and they're like Scandinavia and Spain and everywhere.
Yeah.
And I just have to say no to it all.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to have to turn that down for sure. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I mean, I had to spend like, we were I spent 4 months a couple of years ago when I had this tracheostomy and everything, in the hospital without my horn. First time in my life I had spent time without my horn, and that's when I wrote this lexicon, I call it.
Oh, your book. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so I was practicing in my head,
yeah,
and I created all these patterns. I didn't create them. I mean, there were things I practiced through the years, or made up things and took them through the keys in my mind and sang
yeah,
them under my breath, and how you do that.
yeah.
And so when I came out, I'd watch baseball games and start writing them out. I thought, well, maybe my students would like them or something. And
Right, of course. Yeah.
a friend of mine came over one day and he said, "What's that?" And I said, I'm just writing out these patterns. He said, "Can I look at them?" He says, at the time, it ended up to being 400 and something. He said, "You've got 300 patterns here and you haven't repeated one."
Amazing.
I think this is a book. So
Yeah.
it became that. But, just the fact now, you were just recently, can I bring that up without,
Yeah. Well, sure. Why not? Yeah.
you had a few months and you had a serious,
Well, I mean, I've had the last 2 years. I've been on and off. Mostly, health issues. Mostly on with the health issues. Dating back, I guess in November, I had bypass surgery. And so, I didn't play for a few months. Then I got back to things, did some rehab, and was back to playing and a little bit of teaching. And so I'd say from March to about the end of June last year, 2023, things were good. I mean, I did some touring here. We did that Canadian Jazz Collective tour in Europe. That was about 3 weeks of that. A number of things in town. And then I was diagnosed with aggressive lymphoma. So then I had to start chemo and did that from August to December. Then apparently the cancer was in remission, only to come back a few months later. So another round of chemo, then heavy chemo and stem cell transplant. So that happened in June of this year. So basically a full year of chemo. And I've just been getting back to playing, I'd say about the past month and a half. So I had to, like you, I spent a lot of time off the horn for the first time in my life. And also like you, I mean, like a lot of mental practicing from time to time. But, basically just focusing on trying to get healthy again. I also had some issues with atrial fibrillation caused by the chemo. So it's taken a while to start getting back to feeling like I'm heading in the right direction physically, And so I'd say the past month and a half, I've been playing at home pretty much every day. I did a little recording session about a week ago, but basically haven't been doing any performing. I think I'll get back to it soon. I'm thinking, maybe in the new year. I've booked some things for next summer. And a few things in the spring. So, I'll just slowly get back to things. But I'm enjoying just being at home and working on getting healthy and just playing the saxophone, just playing it every day. And it feels good. It brings me back to when that's all I had in front of me, which is great. So it feels nice to.
Yeah, I'm having a similar experience, except I guess I won't ever really perform in public, but I will record, and I think we'll film some of that, and people can still see it and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Without talking too much about my illness, it reminds me of I had a dog And this dog had this really weird operation, had something wrong with his throat. So they operated on the dog, and it turned out he could make human sounds. And he could really talk. He was talking. So, I got an agent, and he did the Jimmy Kimmel show. He did Jimmy Fallon. He did Seth Meyers, all the late night shows. He was
Right.
on even Dr. Phil. They talked to him and everything, but then they never asked him back. He just did one appearance on all the shows, and they never asked him back. They said all he wanted to talk about was his operation.
Yeah. Well, we can move on to something else if you like. Maybe we'll ask Virginia a few questions. People don't want to hear about your illness nor mine.
Yeah, if we got into it, we'd be sitting here. I'd see the audience there, and then I got and then I wrote, and then I had an aneurysm.
That's great.
But it was benign, and they found, which is actually happened to me. Well, I won't go into that, but that was similar. My last tests were okay.
Yeah. Right on.
Celebrating youth to the pangs of aging. But Betty Davis say getting old is not for sissies.
No, that's for sure.
I wanted to, though, talk about your youth a little bit, because just as I asked your daughter, as I said to Virginia, what was the first music? Now, you were from, let's give people background of that. You came from Nova Scotia.
Yeah, I'm from New Waterford, Nova Scotia, on Cape Breton Island. And I'm not really from a musical family. I mean, my brother and I started playing together. I was quite young. I was about 8, and we had one of those bands that rehearsed in your parents' basement. And so I was playing electric bass in that band for a few years. And then I started playing the saxophone around 10, and continued to play with that group all through high school professionally. Started, doing the, Saturday afternoon sock hops for kids when I was 8. And
Wait, when you were 8, you were playing the bass at that
yeah,
time.
we would do like Saturday afternoon. I don't even remember how much money we get, maybe $1 or $2 each. This would be like 1967 or something like that. And so I got involved with the school band program in grade 7 through 12. So I started playing saxophone about a year before I went in there. Had a great music teacher by the name of Terry Hill. And, studied music theory, composition, all kinds of things in that program. I met Don Palmer,
This
who
is
you
right.
know, when I was about 13, and studied with him my last 2 years of high school.
Now, was
had
Don,
moved back to Breton.
were you near Halifax or Sydney? I don't know the geography.
Oh, Sydney, very close to Sydney, yeah.
So was Don teaching at the university in Attigonish at that time?
No, it was before that program was actually happening. So they brought Don in to be an artist in residence at the College of Cape Breton and in Sydney, which is where Don was from. So the last 2 years of high school, I studied with Don. Then he moved to Halifax from there.
He was not yet in New York, or he had come from New
No,
York?
he had spent about 15, years in New York. He moved to New
so
York
that's
in
after he went back.
1959. This is like 1975, 75, 76, or 76, 77, somewhere
Okay,
in
I
there.
remember that period because we used to practice together. He was Lee Konitz's longest running student.
Yeah, he studied with Lee for a long time. Yeah, they
A
were
long time.
good
And
friends.
so Lee thought we should meet.
Yeah,
So Don and I met, and we used to practice all this, actually learning the Tristano lines together,
Yeah.
lines.
yeah.
And we met regularly. We played regularly. One funny thing is Don had this beautiful hat. It was one of these large Borsalino type hats.
Okay.
It was a wonderful hat. And Don knew I liked his hat. I always talked about it. I said, that's a great hat. I got to get one of those at some point. But it would be copying you, and I would, we'd look ridiculous. we've been hanging out together. We both show up with these hats. Only one of us would wear the hat, and so then he told me, and it was quite sudden. He said, I'm going back to Canada. I didn't know. We were at his house playing lines one day, and he says, he takes the hat and he says, this hat, it's a New York hat.
Right. Wow.
And I think that you should have it because you're staying in New York.
Wow.
And he gave me that.
Yeah, he was so generous. I mean, I can't really thank him enough because, I think, I encountered him at just the right time in my life, and so he was a great teacher for me, and I think it wasn't until I met Don that I really had any kind of indication of, what a serious study music is. I think when I was younger, I wanted to be a musician, and I probably would have ended up, similar to where I am, but it's when I realized you really have to work at this and be serious about it and dig deep and connect with music. I think that happened in my time with Don between the ages of 15 and 17, where I really thought, okay, so I can do this, but I'm going to have to apply myself in a big way. And so from there, I moved to Toronto. I had I went to Humber College for a year. School wasn't really for me. I just wanted to play the horn. So
how old are you at this point? Now you're
17.
Now, did you know some of these other guys? Like there was one other guy in Nova Scotia when you brought me out there that I think we played with, Skip Beckwith.
Skip, yeah, I knew Skip. Yeah, I hadn't had much contact with him because they were in Halifax. I was in Sydney area.
Okay.
So I got to know Skip quite well after, like over the years, and we worked together quite a bit at different times. Skip was out there. Also, Joe Seeley was still there. He had moved to Toronto, I think, probably around the same time I did. You probably knew Joe from.
I knew Joe in Toronto, yeah.
Yeah, from here.
Is he
But
still with us?
yeah, Joe is. Yeah. I saw him recently. He's still playing around, doing his thing. He came out. I worked with Harold Mayburn a few times, so Harold and Joe would always hang out whenever Harold came to town. So he, whenever I worked in town with Harold, he would come out and hang. And also when George Coleman was in town, he'd come out to see George. And because that, it's kind of a throwback to the old days when we used to have Bourbon Street and, clubs where guys would come in, work with a local rhythm section for 2 weeks or a week. And, sometimes Joe would work with people that would come in from New York or Los Angeles or whatever. So yeah, Joe's he's still around. He's yeah.
So you went to Humber, and then that wasn't.
Yeah. So first gigs I did here, I ended up with a steady gig with an R&B band for about a year, and then just some freelance things around town. Did you ever meet the drummer Claude Ranger? Did you know Claude?
Yeah, we had a clash, but
yeah. Well, I could imagine you two, maybe doing that. Two very strong personalities, but I started working with Claude. This is early '80s, I guess, 81, 82.
Well, Virginia actually has to leave. She has a gig or a rehearsal or
Student.
a student. Ah, yes.
Melding minds.
Melding minds, yes. Well, that was actually when I met your dad, I thought I knew he had studied with Don Palmer, and I said, well, I see Don's visit to Canada wasn't entirely in vain. It was to produce a student like that. Then that it was good. Anyway, it's been a real pleasure to talk with you, Virginia, and get to know you to some extent. You know, to know what you're about, and you're sure about some wonderful things. And I congratulate you, Kirk, and also your mama, Lucy. And you know, so if I could leave the house, I'd go out to hear you in New York. But if you're streaming, let me know.
Maybe I'll have to come over. I mean, I was playing at Smalls on Saturday. But I'd love to play some duets sometime. So
it'll be fun.
There you go.
Yeah. Sometimes I have rhythm sections over here too, so you could come and play with us.
That'd be great.
But it's been a real pleasure. So go do what you got to do.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to finish talking with your dad. We're very happy to have had the great Virginia MacDonald on. You got to check her out. She's really playing some fresh things and wonderful music on clarinet. And once again, thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks for having me. And I'll let you guys go.
Okay. We should plug this in now so we don't. So she's got her first CD coming out on Cellar Live. Do you know when that's coming out?
Next spring.
In the spring, she's got a recording coming out. It's her
Great.
first.
Does it have
And
a name yet? Or
I don't know that it has a name. It's a quartet and quintet. So it's with Jeff Keyser, Ira Coleman, and Curtis Noasad. And she has a vocalist on some tracks, Laura Anglade, as well. And it's pretty much.
I see a shadow. Is that a Lucy?
No,
That's
that's
a
Virginia.
Virginia.
She's plugging in
Yeah.
the computer so we don't lose juice
And
here.
my
Do we have
shadow.
enough there? Okay.
So yeah, well, that's great. It was great to talk to Virginia, and we all look forward to her record coming out. It sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
So you were in Toronto, and you were in your late teens now, and is that
Yeah, I moved here in 77, so I was 17. And, I did some studying with, at Humber. I had one lesson with Pat LaBarbera. Just started playing around town. I was working with Claude Ranger's group, did that for a few years. Also, Dave Young had a very nice band at that time with Mark Eisenman and Joe Benza. So, those were like the early sort of jazz gigs for me.
and Mike Murley and Perry White and those guys were all around town?
Yeah, within a year or two of that. Yeah. And and then I started working with Sam in the mid 80s. Did that for a long time, and some things of my own. I did a lot of playing with Lauren Lofsky. We had a group together. Jerry Fuller had a quintet for a while. We did some things with him. I was with Phil Dwyer and myself and Brian Dickinson.
Tapes of that? I would love to hear that.
He never recorded. There might be some tapes around somewhere. I don't know that I have access to them, but that would have been early 90s,
Yeah, even then, people weren't recording that much, It
Yeah.
kind of took on in the 21st century that people started to record everything,
Well, I did my first leader CD, I think I recorded in 1990. And that was the first one I did. That was with Sam Noto, Steve Wallace, Mark Eisenman, and Jerry Fuller.
Was that the Revelers?
The Revelers, yeah, that's right. And
It's been that long. Wow.
yeah, it's almost 35 years. Oh my God, go figure, huh? But so I've done since then. I've done quite a few. I mean, I think 17 or 18 as a leader. CDs,
Really?
Various labels, yeah, and different configurations too. I did 3 big band CDs. I got a nice quintet.
Your own big band, you were with the.
No, my own group. I mean, yeah, yeah. And so,
Did some arranging for it as well?
I didn't do the arranging, but it's all my compositions arranged by different people. So, so I've had a number of different writers. The main writers were Terry Permain and Joe Sullivan. And so I've got a book of about, I think, 35 of my compositions for big band, And
Oh, that's great. And I didn't realize.
I should send some your way at some point. Send you some links, or you can find them on Bandcamp. And yeah, different. I mean, there was a label here for a while called Addo Records, and I did, I think, 7 CDs for them, probably in the space of 7 years. I'd say between 2008 and 2015. So one's a quintet with Tom Harrell, Dennis McCrell, and Neil, Brian Dickinson. There's a record with Harold Mayburn, with Andre White and Neil, Pat LaBarbera guests on it. That won the Juno Award the year it came out. The record with Tom won the East Coast Music Award. Some quartet recordings before that, songbooks, volume 1 and 2. So, I've been different things, over the years. I've done some things. I did a record called Generations with Virginia as a guest and Harold Mayburn. So when we did that in, I think, 2018, something like that. So Virginia was 23 and Harold was 82. So we had 3 different generations. Essentially, it's a ballads record. So, and then most recently, there's the Train of Thought with Pat LaBarbera, where we play the music of John Coltrane. That's on Cellar Live. And then the latest things would be the 2 Canadian Jazz Collective CDs, which I'm.
So you've been prolific. I didn't realize that you had been so
Yeah,
prolific.
Yeah, no, I've been busy, with that. It's kind of slowed down over the last few years, but I'd like to do something with Virginia soon, maybe a quintet. She writes great, so our chemistry is quite good,
Oh, that's terrific.
and so there's a nice balance of material. And plus, she knows a lot of tunes, and I know some tunes, so we'll find some things to do. But yeah.
Well, I just wanted, before we go, I wanted to talk a little bit about when you brought me back to Nova Scotia. And we did some of those gigs together.
Yeah.
And I got to know your dad and your mom. And the thing people might not know about you is that you're part Italian.
Part Italian, yeah. Scottish Italian.
Your mother made some of the best Italian food I'd ever tasted outside of Italy.
Oh, man.
And I said, this is fantastic. I never heard a Scotsman, really cooking like this.
Right.
And he said, well, my mom's Italian. Do you know where in Italy her family was from?
She was from the northern region around Treviso.
Uh-huh.
Like just a bit south of Venice, I guess. That area, northern Italy, and yeah, she could cook.
She could cook. She was wonderful, and I'll never forget your dad with the parrot on his shoulder.
Oh, the parrot, yeah, he had a couple. He lost one, and then he got another one, and they lived forever, right? But yeah, he was a character too.
And I remember your family, I remember he had the grocery store. He owned those places. And also, you were like that version of I Love Lucy, where the guy puts on the hat and the fire chief, oh, that's me. He puts on one hat and then, wait a minute, we're going to need a chef for this. He puts on the chef's hat. What are you eating? because it was like that. I say we'd be hungry at 3 in the morning, and you'd say, "Oh, I know a place we can go.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, this is my family's restaurant. What do you want to cook?"
Right. Yeah, they had, he was kind of an entrepreneurial person, and and also, I mean, I think there was some necessity there, growing up in a small town. I mean, um, he owned a club at one point. He used to promote concerts and boxing, at another point in time.
Oh yeah, I remember him telling me all about that.
No, there's
Very
then there was the retail store, then there were the drive-in restaurants, which were the first ones in our town. So he did a lot of different things over the years,
and he
I
was
mean,
supportive toward your music.
very much so. Yeah. I mean, in fact, we had talked earlier, I said that I got my start playing in a basement band, playing, the rock and roll
Mhm.
hits of the time. He actually managed a band. He got us a record contract when I was 13 years old, and I toured
Really?
all through high school. Yeah, weekends, and sometimes I'd miss Fridays and Mondays, and so I mean that he was very supportive. He
What
wasn't a
was your
musician.
band's name?
The Brothers in One.
Brothers in One.
And it was two sets of brothers and one other kid from the neighborhood. I mean, I was the youngest guy in the band, so it was my older brother, who you've met, Kenny,
Sure, I
who's
remember him.
a recording engineer, and then there was two twins who did not they didn't stay in music. They ended up becoming academics, and
Is your brother twin brothers or sisters or?
yeah, twin brothers. Yeah, so yeah, he kind of managed that band and booked. He kept us busy all through, junior high and high school, and so he did a lot of different things. It was, it's a character.
Well, it's been great, Kirk.
Absolutely, always great to see you and to talk. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad we got to do this. And what a daughter you have, and I'm so glad to hear that you lose track of what your friends do. Like I don't
Yeah.
know about these records. I don't read music journals and this and
Right.
that, what's coming out and what isn't. But I'm glad that you've been prolific, and I'm glad that your health seems to be taking a turn for the better.
I think it's moving in the right direction. Finally, it's been a tough run actually the last couple of years, but
Pretty scary.
well, yeah. I mean, and as I know of your health too. I mean, I've been hearing about you for a long time, and your sort of ups and downs, and glad to see you're doing well and keeping busy, and it's part of life, we
Yeah.
uh, you deal the hand you're played, and but things feel good. I'm looking forward to getting back out and performing again. It's been a while. It's been about almost a year and a half for me since I've last done any performing. So I'm playing at home. It feels good. I'm really enjoying that, and looking forward to getting back out there. So next time I'm in New York, definitely
You
come
stop
by
by.
for a visit.
Yeah,
I
bring
should
your
be there
horn,
I should be there in June. So
play some duets, and
yeah, that'd be
find
fun.
those duets from.
You know what? I keep thinking about that. I got to find them and send them to you, and because there were some very good things, and I mean, it just seemed to happen at a nice time where we were both open to that, and just conceptually, and there was really some nice chemistry there. I loved it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
me too.
it's great.
Anyway, we're gonna go, and we want to thank all of you for having tuned us in, and remind you that it's always appreciated if you give us a like, and you can subscribe for doesn't cost anything. We'll have more details about that as we go along because I never say it right. But we want to thank Kirk once again. Kirk MacDonald, a wonderful, terrific jazz saxophone player, and someone is at my door, just as that happens.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah.
Thank you, Kirk. God bless you, and thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you, Jesse Kaiser, for all your help and everything. And we'll see you next time on The Real Side as my doorbell rings.